253.6%. That is the forecasted increase in logistics costs over the next 12 months. That is not a typo. That is not a worst-case scenario from some fringe analyst. That is the output of the Logistics Managers Index, the same index that lit up in March of 2022, right before inflation hit a 40-year high. It just lit up again at the same level right now. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what this indicator is and why it moves before everything else, why the Fed cannot fix what's driving it, and what the 2022 playbook tells you about the 12-month window you're in right now. And if you don't understand this signal, if you're waiting for the mainstream media to confirm it, you will be the last person to see it coming. You will be buying the wrong assets at the wrong time for the wrong reason. Let's start with what actually happened. The May 2026 Logistics Managers Index report was just released, and inside that report, transportation costs hit their highest point in nearly 10 years of data. Not close to the top, not trending upward, the top. The highest reading the index has ever recorded in the index's entire 10-year history. And here's what makes that significant. The last time it was at this level was March of 2022. Most people watching financial media did not wake up this morning thinking about the Logistics Managers Index. This is freight data. This is the stuff that trucking companies and warehouse operators track. It's not a headline. It's not a ticker. But that's exactly why it matters. Because by the time this data becomes a headline, the window is already closing. The Global Supply Chain Stress Index jumped 1.2 standard deviations in just March and April of 2026. And that 2-month jump is the second largest since July of 2020, the early pandemic. And that's not normal volatility. That's a stress signal, and the people who spotted a similar signal in 2022 had 6 to 12 months of lead time before it showed up in the Consumer Price Index. 6 to 12 months. Here's the first thing I want you to lock in. The freight data is a leading indicator. It moves first. It moves before the Fed reacts. It moves before the media covers it. It moves before the grocery store confirms it. If you are watching this right now, you are watching this before the crowd does. That is the window. And the question is, what will you do with it? But here's where it gets worse. Because most people, when they see an inflation signal this extreme, they assume the same thing. The Fed will raise rates. Costs will come down. Problem solved. Except this time, that tool doesn't work. The Fed is handcuffed, and I'll show you exactly why right now. Here's the assumption baked into almost every inflation conversation you will hear this year. The Federal Reserve raises interest rates. Borrowing becomes more expensive. Demand cools. Prices come down. That's the model. That's how it worked in the early 80s. That's how most people think about inflation. And that model works when inflation is demand-driven. When people have too much money chasing too few goods, you raise the cost of money. People spend less. Prices stabilize. It's clean. It's mechanical. But that is not what is driving this spike. What is driving this spike is supply side. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical energy and shipping choke points on the planet, is under disruption. Energy supply shocks are raising fuel costs across every mode of transportation. And the physical capacity to move goods, the trucks, the ships, the infrastructure, is contracting. Not because demand evaporated, but because the system is under stress it cannot quickly absorb. Now ask yourself, does raising interest rates reopen a choke point? Does a rate hike build more trucks? Does monetary policy lower the cost of jet fuel for air freight? No, no, and no. This is the trap. Higher rates can slow demand. But if supply is the problem, slowing demand doesn't fix the supply. You end up with a slowing economy and persistent inflation at the same time. That has a name, stagflation. So here's the second thing I want you to lock in. Not all inflation is the same. The tool you use to fight it depends entirely on what's causing it. Demand side, the Fed has a lever. Supply side, the Fed is largely watching from the sidelines. When you hear the next inflation headline, when you see the next CPI print, you will now ask a different question than most people are asking. You will ask, is this demand or is this supply? Because that changes everything. What assets move, how long it lasts, whether the conventional playbook applies at all. That is not a small edge. Most people never make that distinction. So if the Fed can't fix it, what does the actual cost trajectory look like? I mentioned 253.6%, and most of you probably heard that and thought, that's a rounding error. That's someone's model gone sideways. That's not real. It's real, and I'm going to walk you through exactly how you get to that number by cause and effect so you can explain it yourself. Forecasters are projecting that logistics costs will rise 253.6% over the next 12 months. I want to be clear about what this means. This is not the price of one product going up 253%. This is the cost to move goods, to truck them, to ship them, to fly them, going up more than 2.5 times from where they are today. Most people will read that number and dismiss it. Typo, outlier, someone's algorithm running hot. So let me walk you through the mechanism, because once you see how that number is built, you can't call it a typo anymore. Step 1, Hormuz. When the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, ships don't just stop, they reroute. And rerouting adds distance, sometimes thousands of nautical miles, which means more fuel, more crew time, more days at sea, more insurance costs per voyage. That cost gets priced into every freight contract. Step 2, energy costs. Fuel is the single largest operating cost in logistics. When energy supply is disrupted, when roughly 20% of the global oil transits that strait, fuel prices spike across every transportation mode. Trucks, ships, air freight. You pay more to move everything, everywhere. Step 3, capacity contraction. Here's what makes supply-side inflation so sticky. You can't fix capacity quickly. You can't order 1,000 new trucks and have them on the road next month. You can't commission a new cargo ship and have it operational in a quarter. Physical infrastructure has lead times measured in years, not weeks. So when capacity contracts, when fewer vehicles and vessels are available to move goods, use of the remaining capacity goes up, and so does the price. High utilization, constrained supply, rising fuel costs, longer routes. Stack those inputs together and run them through 12 months. And 253.6% is not a rounding error. It is the output of a traceable mechanism. Step 4, and this is the one most people get wrong, including people who are running businesses right now. Most people assume that when input costs rise, businesses absorb that pressure gradually, that repricing is slow, manageable, spread out over time. That assumption is wrong. When businesses pricing 2026 and 2027 are flying blind on input costs, when those costs finally crystallize, they don't reprice gradually. They reprice suddenly, all at once, because they have no choice. Those costs are already sitting in their supply chain. The only question is how fast they pass them through. That repricing moment, when it hits, is not a slow bleed. It's a shock, and it lands on the consumer price data hard and fast. Here's what that gives you. You now hold a number, 253.6%, that most people have not seen. And even the people who have seen it are not sure they believe it. You do believe it, because you just walked through the mechanism yourself. That information is not yet priced into the mainstream financial conversation. Most investors are not modeling a 253% logistics cost increase into their 2026 and 2027 outlook. The gap between what the data says and what the market has priced, that is the window. And we've seen this window before. March of 2022, same indicator, same level. And most people watching markets at that moment did not understand what they were looking at until 12 months later, when grocery store prices finally confirmed it for them. Here's what that playbook actually looked like and what it means for right now. Most people remember 2022 inflation. They remember the grocery bills, the gas prices, the Fed making emergency moves. They remember what it felt like. What most people do not remember, because most people were not watching freight data, is what preceded it. In March of 2022, the Logistics Managers Index transportation cost reading hit a peak, not a trend, not a gradual increase, a spike, the same kind of spike we are looking at right now. 6 to 12 months later, the worst consumer price inflation in 40 years. Here's the sequence. Freight spike, 6 to 12 month lag, consumer price peak. The lag is the window, and the people who spotted the freight spike in March of 2022, who understood what they were looking at, had 6 to 12 months of lead time to position before the consumer confirmed it. The people who waited for the grocery store to tell them, they were late. By that time, it was a headline. It was already in prices. Now look at where we are. March, April of 2026. Same indicator, same level, same structural stress signal. The 2-month jump in global supply chain stress is the second largest since July of 2022. But this time, unlike 2022, the Fed is more constrained. In 2022, the Fed had room to be aggressive. Rates were near zero. They had a full toolkit available. Today, rates are already elevated. The room to maneuver is smaller. And the Hormuz checkpoint, the primary supply side driver, is not a domestic policy problem. The Fed cannot negotiate a checkpoint open. Same setup, more constrained response, unresolved underlying driver. The freight spike is the early warning, and it is already fired. The lag between the freight reading and the CPI print is the window. The period where informed positioning is still possible is open right now. The 2022 comparison is not a coincidence or a neat narrative. It is a live playbook, replaying with a Fed that has less room and a supply disruption with no clear resolution. And the repricing event, when businesses stop absorbing and start passing through, will not be gradual. It will be concentrated and fast. Most people will see this inflation in 12 months. You are seeing the signal right now. Knowing the signal is one thing. Knowing how to structure a position around what comes next, how you determine your entry, how you define your stop, how you calculate your risk reward before you put on a single trade, that is a completely different skill. And that is exactly what the measured move framework is built to do. You are sitting in the lag window right now, and the clock is running. The signal has fired. The mechanism is traceable. The 2022 playbook is in your hands. What comes next is the harder question. How do you structure around it before the crowd catches up? Here's what understanding this data doesn't give you: the truth about the direction of price. It gives you a narrative, and narratives matter. But price is what tells you whether the narrative is true or not. The measured move is a framework for understanding the direction of price. It tells you whether this story is being confirmed by price or not. If you trade on a narrative without that framework, you could be on the wrong side of a trade for days, weeks, or even months, while price tells a completely different story. That is the framework that I teach. The traders in my community use the story to understand their environment. They use price to understand the trade. And when those two things disagree, they follow price. They may be trading in the opposite direction of consensus until price changes and tells them something different. They have a process for knowing when that happens. That's the process I teach every day at eminiaddict.com.